Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I have for you 3 true scary stories written by crazy people. Let's hear the other version of the story, the version of the killer. So grab your flashlight and let's step into their dark minds together. I hate it here. Granted, I deserve it. I'm currently locked down behind massive concrete walls and solid steel doors in a maximum security penitentiary. I was locked up what feels like a lifetime ago now. I earned it. I did it. Even second I wrote here in justice. But that doesn't change the fact that I hate it. It is cold here. I have a single concrete court and toilet. My clothes itch and are too thin to keep any chills out. The walls are grey with a slicky green tint due to the door, swamp-like tile that sends a rosy colored glow into the room, reflecting the buzzing fluorescent light above me. The door is thick and unmoving. They painted the same shade of slicky green as the floor. I assumed it is lead based to save on cost. Maybe, if I lick it enough times, maybe I can kill enough brain cells to forget I'm here. I have no roommate, as many who don't, who are perceived as extreme risks. Thankfully, I can still have time outside and shower without being entirely supervised. More than I can say for many in here. My only commodity is my toilet paper and my journal. I earned the journal though, much work and good behavior. The pencil I write with is dull and has no eraser, like that a golfer would use to keep scorecards. I am allowed 4 hours per day with it, between breakfast and lunch. I receive the journal and pencil with my meal and return it kind. If the pencil has any pieces missing, or there are any extensive tears in the pages, then I will lose it for the following day. I comply, so I may have some mild comfort in this concrete cage, in which I slowly die. Again, I definitely earned it, but that doesn't change the fact that prison is hell. I earned my place here because I killed people. I killed many people. I killed 20 people to be exact. This is the first time I've actually written it. I beat the cannibal's murder, which for some reason gave me a sense of accomplishment. However, what gave me more satisfaction was the evenness of the number 20, 2, 0, 20, 20, 2, 0, 2, 0, 20, even and smooth. My compulsion made it this way. 21 would have made getting arrested a living hell. 15 would have been okay, but 20 was much cleaner. Increments of 5, always increments of 5. Sometimes, during a shopping trip, I would grab a stick of gun so as to have 20 or 10 or 30 items even. However, in the case of the killings, it was much more intense. The problem was the itch I felt in between. My mind was in pain from 1 to 4 and 6 to 9. The itch was not as bad during 5s, but 10s were the best. However, the number will eventually attract attention. That number is partially what got me caught, but I had to scratch the itch, so to speak. It made me empathize with vampires in the old horror stories, the sensation of aching thirst. It is nightmarish. The same remained true for my age, 40. I finished at 40, which made me content. I hated not having an even age. I could force down the bad feelings my age ended in 5s or even numbers, but I always had bad years with 1s, 3s, 7s and 9s. I understand it is an abnormal behavior, but it's a compulsion. I have it manageable, so the most would never notice in a day-to-day routine. I have to reminisce on these pages because I have no way of going back. It started many years ago, and the urge only grew from there. The first time I killed was interesting. I should have felt the need to immediately kill again, as I did in later years. But I didn't. They say mental illness worsens with age. I guess that's what kept me from acting again so soon, but I'm not sure. The first time I killed was pretty lackluster. I was walking home from school through the woods, where very few kids were bold enough to cross. While walking, I stumbled upon a man. He was clearly injured, and even at the age of 12, I knew he had little time left. He sat holding his side. He didn't see me yet. From my vantage point, I could see a long, white bone jutting from his leg, which tells me the pain from what his ribs were doing was worse than that of a broken leg. That, or he was just in shock. Far above this section of woods was a road, and from what I could see, a vehicle burst through railing. The wrecked vehicle was a truck, lay decimated some 40 feet below the road, in the brush and rocks. I remember this truck. Either way, the driver had pulled himself from the wreckage and crawled in agony upwards of 50 feet to the nearest tree, where his strength was slowly failing him. I remember seeing a large shard of metal which had been ripped from the side of the truck, and picking it up. I walked slowly to the man, who reached pitifully towards me for help. I slowly shoved the sharp edge of the metal into the man's throat and watched as blood began to sprout from the wound in his mouth. He gargled like a drowning cow on his own blood, and after a time he ceased all movement forever. It was a rush of which I cannot explain. The excitement of ending a human life is next to none. I was content for a fleeting moment. I stared at the body for some time before taking a bloody shred of his pant leg that was hanging by a thread. I just wanted to have a keepsake. That was my first kill. I was never caught, nor even suspected. Growing up in the mountains of the south allowed much privacy, and it allowed me to get away with murder. As time grew, so did that feeling of power and accomplishment. I felt like God. No one even knew I was the way I was. I would never be a suspect because I knew to hide. From the time I was a boy, I knew how to blend in. Sometimes it was a challenge because of my appearance, but I learned a simple skill: how to hide in plain sight. I was able to work hard in the background. I made good grades and maintained very well close friendships throughout school, so no one would discover anything about me. However, I made sure everyone had a nice thing to say about me. Carrying groceries, helping kids with studying, always using manners. I graduated in the upper ranks of my class and school attended the local college. After I earned a degree in business, I worked hard where I could and raised enough money to buy my own rig. I worked by riding the highways as a trucker for years and eventually bought 2 more rigs. By 35, I was a respectable business owner in my old town with a dispatch and a few drivers. I obviously still drove, even as the owner, because it kept me close to my only real passion. I hid well in plain sight because white people love a nigger. In a town of 90% white and 10% other, I learned to blend despite being a minority. Learn to talk like them, learn to walk like them, and you can manipulate them into whatever you want. I hate them. Not white people, all people. My mother died shortly after I graduated high school from heart failure, and I felt liberated, for I held her opinion highly. Her opinions often kept me in line and respectable. When she died, I was free to pursue my own interests. My father, while a good man in his own right, never held much weight in my actions, so I walked the path I chose for myself, despite what his feelings may be. Either way, I dwindled for some time after the first murder. The urge slowly grew. By high school, I kept my eyes peeling for another opportunity to snuff out a life. Finally, that day came. The second time I murdered was equally uninspiring. I found myself at a graduation party and the whole senior class was drinking heavily. All except me. We were at the home of a wealthier student who had maintained a spotless record through both junior high and high school and wanted to go out in a way where she could get out of her box. I learned two things that evening. The first, that a well-mannered, well-educated young lady was no different than anyone else in regards to having a darker side. She wanted to be remembered for a party, not her good grades, not her generous deeds, not her modest manner of dress, but a party. Everyone has a dark side in some way. This was the first thing I learned. The second was that if anyone is drunk and dancing on the roof, you could bump a certain young lady discreetly enough to send her 3 stories down into the concrete and make it look like an accident. She landed with a smug that can only be replicated in my dreams. This was the first time I was aroused by a killing. I'm not sure why. Her deep brown hair flowed past her shoulders, and the look of utter confusion and terror in the face of innocence was priceless. Blood pulled from her head and seeped into the nearby swimming pool. I fancied her, you could say, but only because she represented something that does not exist, human innocence. When her skull cracked against the pavement, I was instantly excited. I had to sneak away to handle it and steal a memento from the girl's room. The chaos I caused that night again resurfaced my deep sense of accomplishment that only comes from death. This was the second time I killed, 18 years of age. I had always enjoyed lifting weights and working towards my overall health. A fat predator is a bad predator. I maintained this level of fitness for most of my adult life. I had to, in order to pursue my passion. Of course, things would have a way of catching up with me. I was incarcerated with an unfortunate mountain of evidence. I won't say I covered every base perfectly to ensure not getting caught, but I felt like I was careful enough. I guess not in hindsight. I remember the day I was arrested. I had turned 40 the month prior and was on the road delivering a shipment of plywood. I was behind the wheel of my rig in rural Alabama. I was taking a back road because I enjoy the scenery, and when you're the boss, you can set your own schedule. At this point, I had killed 19 people, and the itch was present. I would have to rub the back of my neck when I thought about it. It needed to be scratched. It needed to take care of it. That's when I saw her. Miles from any structure or any living person was a broken-down baby blue Volkswagen Beetle. The emergency lights were flashing. The height of my truck allowed me to scan both her car and the area surrounding us. It was tall, uncut grass and trees, covered in utter blackness due to the overcast night. There was no one for miles and miles. We would be alone together. I pulled in behind her, with my low lights so as to not scare her. When I stepped out of the truck, I addressed her. I have worked on my speaking voice for years in order to betray their security into my house. Are you all right? She stepped out from behind her hood and I saw her in better sight. She was a young Hispanic woman. She was silky, dark hair to her shoulders and black librarian glasses. She was pretty, which was a bonus for me. Consider it like a dinner. I also knew she could complete the cycle. She could be the 20th and I could rest. Best yet, she was petite. I think the engine is shot, she said in a depression. That these dark woods certainly played well into. She just wanted to get out of danger, little did she know. I can give you a ride. I own this company, so I can make the time. I didn't want to sound presumptuous, but I knew by making myself a manager, it would remove the creepy truck driver mentality. I don't know. I promise. I'll take you straight into town and we can find you a phone. Okay, she said, with her fear betraying her skepticism. Thank you. I'll get the door for you. As she walked to the passenger side, I held the door open for her. As she took her first step, I grabbed her ankle and pulled her straight down with as much force as I could manage. Her jaw connected with the stumbled metal stairs, full force. I know some teeth were broken by the crunch that emanated from the skull. She fell limp to the dirt as I lifted her onto my shoulder. She didn't stare long enough for me to grab a large socket wrench from my rig. I could feel the warm blood from her mouth pouring down my shoulder. I carried her into the tall grass, just out of sight. We made love then. I made love before to some, but this was special. She was the 20th. She would complete the need. Halfway through, she began to wake and struggle. From there, I had to act. I took the socket wrench and began to hit her. She struggled to scream. I hit her in her pretty face. Over and over, over and over. When I had finished on all fronts, I took her wallet from her jeans. Hannah, I believe her name was. I took her glasses as they fell off, when her face collided with my truck and avoided the wrath of the socket wrench. They had her name engraved inside the temple. I drove, leaving the scene entirely. I had to re-enter the highway some time later and saw lights in my mirror. I had been stopped before, once even with a boat in the back, so I was not worried. The officer walked to the side and called me out. "You Williams?" "Yes, sir," I answered coolly, holding my ID and paperwork for the truck and delivery. He then spoke into his radio. "Yep, we found him." "Sir, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "Why?" I demanded. I was not about to be cuffed and restrained for no good reason. He then turned me violently to my truck and slapped cuffs around my wrists, from where he sat me on the pavement and called for backup. When other officers arrived, one finally noticed the blood on my back. They then found the glasses. They had stopped me initially because one of my drivers was caught with a brick of marijuana. I was brought down on a technicality. My run lasted from 12 to 40. I was undetected for that entire time. I killed strangers only. I was so careful. A technicality was the only thing that could have done this. My simple home was turned about until they found my treasure box, a shoebox of souvenirs. From there, it was easy to put me at every single murder. Every homeless person stabbed to death in cities. Every prostitute with their heads missing. Every unsupervised child in crowded streets. I was linked to all of them. Now, one may ask, why would you be so stupid as to keep all these things? To that, I would say I had to. It was my passion and the only thing that gave me meaning. I had to keep something around. They were the only memories I could have of those times. Like I first wrote, I deserve to be in prison, but I don't regret in the slightest what I've done. The trial was grueling and irritating. Since I killed across state lines, there was arguments as to where to have my trial, but it became a federal issue, which only meant my lawyer explained many of the killings would be circumstantial at best, but just as many have my now connected DNA, and they are going to be nearly impossible to deny. I decided to throw in the towel. The media was out for blood, the public was out for blood, and the jury was out for blood. I had my fill, so now it was time to pay the favor forward. There was no way to avoid a life sentence. Despite the difficulties of fighting some evidence of murders, I was still convicted for 18 of the 20. However, I was punished for them all. The day of sentencing, I stood still before the judge. The judge looked down at me and rumbled on about my cruelties. I stood with the thought that the death penalty was illegal in the state. It was utterly satisfying to know. I snapped out of it when he got to the sentence. Seeing as how the death penalty is illegal in this state, I can only do the most. I sentence you to 1,001 life sentences. He was being melodramatic. Not in history had there been such an absurd sentence. What's worse, the number was uneven. My demeanor slightly shaken, I asked the judge, Why 1001? The courtroom was silent. The families, friends, and jury looked at me with contempt. But that didn't matter then, even less now. The judge leaned over his podium. He smiled. It still boils my blood, and he calmly replied, "To torment you. That's how I got where I am now. I don't interact with the other inmates of the guards. I just mind my business as best as I can. I don't like to think about my sentence because it makes me itch. Similar to when you haven't paid a certain bill but don't have the funds. It's a wincing, mental discomfort. I write the rest of this in a testament to what happened yesterday, in hopes it reaches someone on the outside. My day started normally. A loud bell rang, and I stood to my feet. From there, my door opened, and I walked to the shower facility. I tried to find myself at the end of the line, so as to get the most time out of my cell. I also like my privacy. My fellow black inmates gave me hell for being crazy, since the African American killers are considered such an abnormality. I entered the showers normal, but I felt a sense of dread that I don't know how to describe. I just felt unpleasant. I felt watched and alone at the same time. I felt completely hopeless and near despair. I quickly finished my shower and left the facility. The halls were quiet, and the stationary guard was not at his post in front of my cell. I was alone in this hallway. Suddenly, I felt a large hand grip my shoulder and order me forward. The next thing I knew, I was being escorted to the warden's office. I walked the tight and closed halls until I reached the last room on the right. Inside was totally dark apart from a dim lamp illuminating a desk. The hand shoved me in and slammed the door behind me. I saw the silhouette of Warden and he beckoned me to sit. I sat across from him in uncomfortable silence. He didn't move and neither did I. I would force him to make the first move. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke up. "Let's go over your file." I did not respond. He gave no indication as to why. Count 1. Confessed. Not convicted. Man falls off cliff and you assess him in passing. You were 12, so it wasn't included in your final file. Count 2. Confessed. Convicted. You confessed to shoving a young woman off a roof and then robbing her. You were 18. Count 3. Confessed. Convicted. Homeless man near your college. You stabbed him and cut out a tooth. You were 20. Count 4. Confessed. Not convicted. You claim to have shot a prostitute in Texas. The souvenir you took could not link you to the crime, and she had no family. You were 24. Not convicted, but you know what you did. Counts 5 through 9. Confessed. Convicted on all counts. They were all strangled, and you kept a lock of hair. Left them on the highway. Count 10. Convicted. You took a lost 12-year-old and drowned him. You were doing well in life by this point, but murder still called, didn't it? Count 11. Confessed. Convicted. Ha! This one was special, wasn't she? That gas station employee who you stalked for a while. Followed her home and broke in, took your time, and did it right. She broke your perfect streak, and you were going to make her pay, right? Kept her locket as a token of your affection. Count 12. Convicted. You took a young man to you from a local club in Missouri, strangled him the moment the door was closed, chopped him up and kept his teeth. Count 13 through 17. Confessed. Convicted on all counts. The hitchhiker phase. Here it seems you just wanted to close the gap. You got sloppy, left a lot of evidence behind. Count 18. Confessed. Convicted. You killed a housewife in Florida. You were on vacation at the time. You spotted her and just had to do something, waiting until her husband left and had yourself a time. Another rape and strangling. You took her blood-soaked necklace. Count 19. Confessed. Convicted. You saw a jogger one morning and followed in your truck. When you knew their routine, you waited in the bushes until he passed. You killed him with a hammer and took one of his shoes. Count 20. Confessed. Convicted. The one that brought you down. You couldn't resist her. You were too careless, too excited. Now you're here. You took her glasses and bashing her head in and assaulting her. Do you know what they call you? He completely bastardized my work. I had done so much and he swept over it like nothing. I glared at him in the dark before answering. The scavenger hunt killer? I hated that name. They gave me that name because my murders spanned so far and I collected odd items. Again, my works and efforts were reduced to a joke. It still makes me sick. The warden spoke up again. Are you sorry? I sat for a moment before responding. Would it matter? He chuckled in a deep-throaty laugh. No, he said, settling in. I guess it wouldn't. He continued. I don't get it really. You're a highly intelligent, healthy and well-spoken man. Why on earth would you throw that away? I sat in angry silence. I refused to give this man the satisfaction of an answer. Do you believe in God? The warden asked. I chewed my tongue before responding. No. Pity, he responded. As if my response didn't really matter. That would make what I'm about to tell you much better. I waited for him to continue. Your sentence is being commuted. I raised an elbow in disbelief. Really? Yes, he sat, still shadowed, but I knew he was smirking. What does that have to do with God? I know I should have had much more important questions to ask him in that moment, but I was curious. I assumed he meant I should be thankful. Well, he said, his voice trailing, that would make this next part easier. You passed away this morning, son. Before I could respond, his hand tossed a few photos in front of me. It was me. I lay covered in blood on the shower floor. I had been stabbed from the looks of it. Yeah, the warden, or who I thought was the warden, spoke up. Some fella wanted to prove his might by stabbing a serial killer to death in the shower. Didn't work though, since he was caught and will most likely be in solitary, if that's some comfort. I stared at him. I stared at the photographs. I simply could not accept it. This is absurd. I felt insulted. I know it seems odd, but hear me out. He sat upright, ready to make his case. Do you know what the Universalists are? No? Well, he continued without missing a beat. Basically, it states that everyone gets into heaven, even if you aren't necessarily in their denomination. This is heaven? I was ready to laugh. This was a joke. No, see, that's the bad news, he continued. See, everyone does eventually move on, but before anyone can move on, they must resolve all the obligations that they have on earth, and judgments. Before I could remark, he caught his breath and explained further. You died this morning. You served one of your 1001 life sentences. Welcome to number 2. I stood up. This isn't funny. I'm leaving. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, unable to use my body. Please, I heard the warden, though his voice was now much deeper, sinking my gut. Sit. I returned to my seat with a sensation that was new to me. Fear. Now, he continued, his voice returned to normal. You are not dead. You just started another sentence. Everything will be back to normal when you leave. When I dismiss you, you will leave here and return to your bank. Do you understand? I nodded, still stunned by what I then knew as truth, the unexplained dread I felt that morning. I walked out of the warden's office that day, feeling a hopelessness I have never known. The prison was the same, but it wasn't. It was lonelier, darker. That feels like forever ago. I learned since then. First lifetime, From the age you are incarcerated. I accepted a 40-year-old life sentence, but after speaking with a few other inmates serving like myself, I learned that it varies somewhere from 80 to 112 years. It varies, but it is always at least 80. I guess the guards don't notice after a certain point. Also, I assume they don't register that we never seem to leave. Inexplicable, but that was happening. Second, each go-around changes you. The prisoners don't notice you. The others like you have fewer words. The guards seemed always outside of the line of sight. They were like fleeting shadows. I am cracking mentally. I will walk into the showers and see someone shaving, even speak with him at length. However, when I turn a corner or close a stall door, he'll be gone when I return. Next, I learned that suicide doesn't work. I learned the same way every inmate here, like me, does. I swallowed bleach and had a miserable stomachache, but no death. I hung myself, where I was fully conscious, for 8 straight hours until a guard found me while bringing my breakfast the following morning. I learned that being murdered, but murdering, adds it. So no one on life row attempts murder here. Finally, escaping isn't an option. We have runners sometimes, men who just finished their first sentence. The guy just snapped. He just panicked and ran. The snipers didn't even turn. He grabbed the fence and immediately fell to the ground, from where he shook violently. He died right there of a heart attack. I saw him a week later, 3rd life sentence, half crippled. I guess we get punished if we try to leave. I don't know if this is permanent. He was a wreck upon returning. It reminded me of my cats in my neighborhood as a boy. The first time you heard it, the animal twitches and becomes neurotic. But given enough time, it accepts its fate. Either way, we are forced to remain, forced to leave until we pay our dues. Never truly dying. I don't even know if time is the same now, but if you are reading this, I managed to successfully get these pages out. I have a handful of plans, which I cannot record. I'm leaving this journal for anyone who is a criminal or wants to become one, but I do wish I knew then what I know now. This is simply a warning. 100,000 years of mopping floors or scrambling toilets. 100,000 years on a concrete slab, a hard, unforgiving surface. 100,000 years with 1 hour a day in a dying earthscape I barely recognize. 1,001 life sentences. 1,000 to go. Only one small thing gives me comfort. With 1,000 life sentences, at least, it's a nice and a clean number. I hope I don't die too soon and ruin this nice, even lifetime, because the next one will be hell. I stumbled across this website a few days ago, and it seems like the only place where I can get an answer to what's been happening at my house the last few days. I am a 31-year-old single father. My wife died about 3 years ago. A drunk driver had torn across the median and slammed into her. My daughter is 4 years old and named Jacqueline, Jackie for short. I work as a carpenter for a company that builds custom furniture, and I make a little extra money by doing other custom jobs at home. For the sake of privacy, I'm leaving the company's name out of it. I love my daughter more than anything in the world. I want to give her the life I never had. Right now, I am working on a custom cabinet that looks like the TARDIS from Doctor Who. I'm getting paid a lot of money, but it's a very complicated job. The buyer wants it to be life-sized, fairly detailed, and to have a heavy deadbolt lock. I have at least another week left of work before I get paid. Right now, I'm counting my pennies. This story begins last week. I decided to stop at a bar on Main Street. Jackie was at a friend's house for a sleepover, so I figured I can take some time out for myself and have a beer or two. After I finished off my third one, I looked at my watch and saw it was 11 at night. I decided to pay my tab and call it a night. I was making my way down the street when I decided to cut down an alley towards the garage I parked my truck. I was walking by some garbage cans when something caught my eye. A doll was propped up against the wall to the side of one of the plastic bins. I picked it up to give it a look over. The doll's face was a little dirty and the clothes were torn up. The makeup was heavy and smeared like it had spent a day or two in the rain. I figured if this sewed up the clothes and cleaned it up a bit, it would be a nice gift for Jackie. So I brought the doll back to my truck and went home. I went into my workshop and cleaned off the smudged paint before sewing a simple dress out of a scrap cloth. I put the new clothes on the doll and waited until Jackie got home. The next morning, Jackie came home and her eyes lit up when I gave her the new toy. She took the doll she decided to name her Marie into the workshop with me. She was clearly excited and talked at a mile a minute. She kept asking me about what I could and couldn't make for the doll. The rest of the Sunday was spent with me working and her playing with Marie. Around 8, it was bedtime for Jackie. I followed her to her room, put Marie on the bed next to her and read her a bedtime story. I went back outside to keep working. That's when the first weird thing happened. I was in my shop until maybe midnight before I called it a night. There, on the living room floor, was Marie, leaning up against the couch and staring right at me. I picked her up and brought her to Jackie's room, too tired to give it a second thought. I went to bed and woke up early to bring Jackie to school. She was disappointed that she couldn't bring her new friend to preschool, but I told her there were rules she had to follow. Before I drove her to school, I helped Jackie take Marie up to her room and put her to bed. I brought Jacqueline to school, and when I came back home to grab my tools, I heard a loud banging coming from her room. I grabbed a butcher's knife from the kitchen and went upstairs, thinking someone had broken in. I made my way upstairs with my heart pounding in my ears. My left hand grabbed the door handle and threw it open. There, on the ground, was Marie, staring right up at me with her marble blue eyes. Then she made a noise. I swear to fucking God, she made a noise. Out of instinct, I raised the cleaner over my head. That's when the noise stopped. Marie just laid on the carpet, staring at me. I slammed the door shut and ran down to the kitchen. I picked up the phone, but stopped before I started to dial. I figured I was just losing it. This job had gotten to me too much. If I fucked it up, I'd lose my next 3 months of bill payments. It had to be stress, right? I thought. I took a deep breath, grabbed my keys, and went to work. I came home a little before Jackie did. I sat in the living room, half afraid of going upstairs, with a firm knowledge it was a lack of sleep. Jackie came home while I was making sketches of the locking system of the cabinet. She came home, hugged me, and I made her a snack. As soon as she finished, she ran upstairs to play with Marie as I sat downstairs and finished my sketches. I half expected a scream to come from Jackie's room. If I told Jackie about what had happened that morning, she would never sleep again. If I got rid of Marie, Jackie would never forgive me. Since I thought at the time it was just my imagination, I let her play with the doll. Nothing happened the rest of the day. I went out of my workshop and did my work without interruption until Jackie came outside with Marie in tow. She started to play catch with her on my shop floor. Eventually, she looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, when are you making Marie's new clothes?" "Soon, honey," I responded. "Marie isn't happy, Daddy." The hammer I was holding dropped. "How do you know?" My daughter sat with Marie leaned against the wall opposite her. Jackie rolled the ball towards the doll. "Marie is sad. I think if she had prettier clothes, she wouldn't be though," she said with a smile. I picked the hammer back up and looked at the doll. "How do you know that?" Jackie retrieved her ball and rolled it back to Marie. "She told me. She is a princess. She needs to wear the best clothes. How else will her family recognize her?" I went back to work with a chuckle. "I will get on that first thing." I nearly crushed my daughter's doll out of paranoia. I was jumpy. Marie was sad? That's just my kid's imagination. I shrugged it off and went back to work. That night, I laid awake. The school was closed the next day, and I had taken the day off. I was looking forward to spending the day with my daughter, but at that moment, I just couldn't fall asleep. I got up, figuring if I wasn't going to sleep, I might as well get started on Marie's new clothes. I had plenty of scrap fabric laying around, and by 3 in the morning, I had the rough draft of a new jacket and dress. I started heading to bed, thinking I would get a few hours of sleep before I had to wake up and cook breakfast. This next part might seem crazy. I heard the heavy breathing of Jackie sleeping, so I know it wasn't her. But coming from her room, I heard a weird sound. It was like muffled sobbing. I drifted off before I could think too much about it. The next day, I was sitting on the couch while Jackie was playing with Marie in her room. That's when I heard the scream. I ran upstairs and saw Jackie crying and holding her finger. "Marie bit me," she screamed as she ran into my arms. I looked at the doll and saw a trickle of blood running from the corner of her mouth. I told Jackie to leave the room. She stepped outside and I slammed the door shut. It was just me and Marie. "Please," she said, "I just want to go home." I grabbed the sock off the ground and shoved it back into her mouth before tying a belt around her head. I made sure the ropes were going to keep her put before I picked her up. I put her in Jackie's closet on top of the clothes I had found her in, a short black skirt and a black t-shirt with princess written in black Gothic type. I had to stop myself from kicking Marie in her side so she'd stop crying. No matter what I did, I didn't want to break my daughter's toy. Now, here I am, writing this. Jackie's at the neighbors and I'm seriously freaked out. Help me, what do I do? I can't call anyone. I just turned on the news and there was a story about the police looking for the missing doll. Something about it going missing after a night out with friends. Allison used to work at the toy store in town. It was one of those big chain stores that easily had tens of thousands of toys and bikes and TVs in it. She got the job when she was 16. It was actually her first job. She would work after school and at the weekends, doing overtime here and there to save us as much as she could for driving lessons and other things that teenagers spend money on. She stayed there until she was 19, working the late night shifts nearly every day of the week after leaving school. The late night shift was relatively easy. The workers were tasked with tidying the displays and handling deliveries between 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., not too demanding. One night, though, things were not too straightforward. Allison shoved up for the night shift at 11:56 p.m. Exactly. She did the night shifts because they paid extra money, I think. She met with the manager out front, took the keys and went inside. She locked the main doors behind her and threw her bag and jacket over one of the checkouts, getting ready to settle into a book when her manager was out of sight. The time hit 12 a.m. and it started. The bikes were kept to the far left of the store, a far distance from the checkouts. Yet, the sound of 6 adult-sized bikes falling in unison was hard not to hear. Regardless of distance, she stood up with a sigh and went to fix the display. As she made her way to the bikes, her nose buried in her phone, she heard faint music coming from the Barbie display in the direction she had been coming from. She stopped and focused on the sound, her ears straining to separate the sound of the music from the humming of the fluorescent lights. When she decided that the music had stopped, she started back on her way towards the bikes. She approached the display and began returning the bikes to their upright position. "Stagger the bikes, biggest to smallest," she muttered to herself. She stood back for a second to admire her work, then proceeded back to the checkout. Somewhere along the way, she decided to detour to the break room for some coffee and a snack. and so made her way through the staff-only door and up the narrow concrete staircase. Coffee and snack in hand, she made the careful descent down the stairs, her stare unbroken as she willed the coffee to stay in the cup with her eyes. She put the bag of candy in her mouth and pulled open the heavy staff-only door once again and stepped out into the shop floor into darkness. The humming of the fluorescent lights had ceased. This happened sometimes when there was no activity on the shop floor for a certain number of minutes after a certain time of night. So she thought nothing of it and made her way back to the checkout. The walk back was uneventful except for a few drops of coffee scattered on the floor due to her looking up the check she wasn't en route for a collision with the display. She took her seat and, as predicted, the light softly awoke. Little happened until 4 a.m. There was the occasional creak and bump of the building, which was to be expected. It had served as a shift factory for years before it had been bought and repurposed. Allison had begun to doze off when she remembered about the camping equipment she had promised to set up for display. She sighed and rose to retrieve the new stock from the delivery bay and started to set up the tent. The construction was rather straightforward. Put the stakes into the correct slots and eventually you would have a tent. As she prepared to put the final stake into the tent, she realized one was missing. She searched under instructions and material only to come up empty-handed. She resigned to leaving the tent as it was and explaining to her manager in the morning she was not going to spend the last 2 hours of her shift searching for a plastic stick. She decided not to go back to the checkouts, but rather to browse the shelves for a gift for her niece. She would be 10 later that week and was very much into race cars, so that is where Allison stared. She was examining the aisle for different cars, whispering her sales pitch that she used on customers to herself. When she heard the sound of a race car driving along the ground, she suspected a child that had been in the store earlier had left the display car's remote on and that the stick was being pressed against something, causing the car's wheels to spin. No sooner had she reached this conclusion and decided to check the display when she saw it. A little red race car at the end of the aisle. She moved towards it to pick it up, but it reversed away. She immediately broke into a cold sweat, probably picturing every Child's Play movie she'd even seen. She turned and started walking towards the opposite end of the aisle when she heard the car start moving again. She wiped her head around to see it stop dead in its tracks. So she ran. She assumed someone had broken into the store and was pranking her, but she was not one to take chances. She bolted for the door. As she made her way to the door, the lights went off once more, almost as if they were acting in response to the lights. Every toy in the Furby aisle came to life, playing music, dancing, all in their boxes. Allison hated Furbies. They were creepy and old toys. She didn't see the appeal. She grabbed the keys, unlocked the door, and stepped into the cold morning air. The sun had not yet made an appearance, but the night was getting lighter. She breathed frantically, sighing and eventually laughing at how foolish she was to have fallen for such an obvious prank. She turned to make her way inside. Then a bat struck her on the back of her head. It was perfectly executed. Then all of the panic, all at once, and then the thump. It was exquisitely planned. How do I know all this? All of the things about what happened in the store, how she was feeling, what she said and did. I'm quite the prankster, and a perfectionist to a fault, if I do say so myself. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up, and if you like my videos and want to see more, subscribe to my channel. Take care, and I will see you all in my next video.